Hi, I'm Marla. I wasn't just uninvited from Christmas, I was erased. No seat at the table, no name in their mouths, just the girl he lives with. I wrapped every gift under their tree, and they smiled as they opened them, without me. But the truth? That wasn't the worst part. The silence, the manipulation, the way I slowly disappeared. How did it get this far? The Christmas tree was already half lit when I stopped to wipe the sap off my fingers. It clung to my skin like the past, sticky and hard to scrub away. The ornaments lay in neat rows on the carpet, grouped by color. I always color-coded them because chaos made me nervous. I wasn't raised around it. Grant walked in just as I was clipping the last hook onto the gold bell. His tie was loose, his face tighter than usual. "They're doing Christmas Eve dinner at the house again," he started, not looking at me. My fingers paused mid-motion. "Okay." He scratched the back of his neck. "They think it might be better if you sit this one out." I stared at the tree. The lights blinked, unaware. "It's not personal," he added quickly, eyes darting. "They just feel like the vibe gets weird when you're there." "The vibe," I repeated. Not a question, a confirmation. He nodded like that made it real. "Yeah, Mom said it might help things cool down." I didn't cry, not because I wasn't hurt, but because I had run out of softness months ago. I wrapped my arms around myself, the faint scent of pine rising from the branches behind me. "Will you be going?" He hesitated. That hesitation was louder than anything he could have said. "They asked me to." I nodded. "Of course." We didn't speak for the rest of the night. He scrolled through his phone. I finished the tree. The next morning, I watched him from the hallway. He moved around the living room, carefully collecting the gifts I had spent weeks choosing. A leather wallet for his dad, embossed with initials. A skincare set for Hannah, hand-selected from the brand she loved to post about. A monogrammed blanket for their dog. I wrapped them all. Perfect corners, matte paper, name tags written in cursive. He stacked them into a bag without a word, as if they weren't from me. As if I hadn't stayed up until 2 a.m. 3 nights in a row making sure everyone had something thoughtful under that tree. He reached for the door. "They didn't want me," I said flatly, "but they'll still take what I bring." Grant stopped, turned slightly, said nothing. Then he left. The room was so quiet after the door closed, I could hear the furnace kick on. I stood there staring at the base of the tree, surrounded by empty space where gifts used to be, where I used to be. I walked over, unplugged the lights, and stood in the dark. That was the moment I stopped waiting to be invited. I stopped needing to be accepted. They wanted the hostess, the giver, the silent woman in the background. What they forgot was that silence doesn't mean surrender. And if I wasn't welcome, maybe it was time they got what they truly deserved. I wasn't there when it happened, but I could picture it perfectly. Dolores sitting at the head of her long, polished dining table, her manicure gleaming under the chandelier as she untied the gold ribbon. The room full of people pretending to like one another just enough to share turkey and boxed wine. I'd wrapped every gift like it was a favor owed. Crisp folds, double-sided tape, tags in my best cursive. "From Grant and Marla," I wrote. Always both names, always trying to belong. The shampoo she opened first wasn't fancy, cheap, generic, the kind sold on the bottom shelf of a drugstore clearance bin. Her face must have twisted before she even sniffed it. Then came the socks for her husband, bright blue with cartoon dollar signs. The perfume for Hannah reeked of cotton candy and smoke. And the piece de resistance? A giant rawhide bone for the dog they called their fur baby, though it was barely the size of a slipper. "She's mocking us," Dolores had reportedly snapped, slamming the bottle down. "She humiliated us in front of our own family." I imagined the hush in the room, Grant standing awkwardly near the fireplace, gift bag still dangling from his hand. Maybe he mumbled something about not knowing, maybe not. Either way, he didn't stop them. And that was the most satisfying part. My absence had never made them louder. It had made them honest. The next morning, I scrolled through Facebook while sipping cold coffee in bed. The usual parade of matching pajamas and smug smiles filled my screen. I paused on a post shared by Hannah, Ellison Family Christmas, 2022. I recognized the backdrop, the garland, the angle of the shot. I had taken that photo. I'd stood behind the camera, adjusted the lighting, told them when to smile. But I wasn't in it. They had cropped me out, like a flaw, like a smudge they could clean away. Comments flooded the post. Such a beautiful family. So blessed to have each other. I zoomed in. No trace of me, not even a sleeve or a blurred outline in the background. I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. The paint above the bed was cracking again. Tiny fissures spreading outward like veins under skin. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted proof I was never there. I got up, walked to the closet, and pulled down the large box labeled Holiday Save for Next Year. Inside were the gifts I hadn't wrapped yet, things I'd chosen months in advance. A hand-painted mug for Grant's aunt, a fancy tea sampler for his mother's cousin, a cashmere scarf still sealed in tissue paper for his sister-in-law. I placed them on the bed, one by one. Then I opened the drawer on my side of the nightstand. Inside was a notepad. I tore out a fresh sheet and drew 2 columns. One read, names, the other, dollar store ideas. I was carrying a box of old ornaments to the car when I heard her voice. Dolores was leaning over the front fence, chatting with our neighbor Linda like they were co-stars in a sitcom. Her voice always lifted just enough when other people were around. Yes, Grant's doing well, she said proudly. He's always been the responsible one. Linda asked something I couldn't quite make out. Dolores replied, casual as ever. Oh, that girl he's living with? She's around, I guess. That girl, not his wife, not by name, just a vague presence barely worth the breath it took to mention. I didn't freeze, I didn't drop the box, I didn't say a word. I smiled, nodded, walked past them like I hadn't heard it at all. But inside, something shifted. Not snapped, just slid into place. Like a gear that had been grinding finally catching and turning in a new direction. Later that week, an invitation popped up in the family group chat. Brunch, Saturday, at the house, just girls. I responded with a heart emoji. Saturday came. I wore a soft cream sweater, fixed my hair, and baked cranberry muffins from scratch. I even brought whipped honey butter, chilled in a mason jar. When I pulled up, the driveway was empty, curtains drawn, silence. I waited, knocked, nothing. I called Hannah. No answer. I called Grant, straight to voicemail. I sat on the front steps for 15 minutes. Then I walked back to my car. Across the street, old Mr. Wagner was watering his lawn. He waved. You just missed them, he said. I saw them leave an hour ago, all dressed up. They were heading downtown, I think. I thanked him, got in the car, and drove without music. I didn't need directions. I knew exactly which brunch spot they loved. Grant's mother once bragged about their mimosas being classy, but not overpriced. I parked down the block and walked. There they were, behind the wide glass windows, bathed in sunlight and self-congratulation. Dolores, Hannah, Tessa, even Grant. They were laughing, raising glasses. Tessa leaned into Grant's shoulder, lips parted mid-joke. No one noticed me. I didn't go inside. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I turned around, drove home. When I walked through the door, I took off my coat and set the muffins gently on the counter. Then I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and created a new folder on the desktop. Plan B 2023. Inside it, I started a spreadsheet. Title, Exit Strategy. It was a Tuesday. Gray light through the office windows, the kind that made everything look dusty. I was microwaving leftovers in the break room when my phone buzzed. A notification from the family group chat. I opened it instinctively. Habit, not hope. Hannah had sent a message. Can't believe she actually showed up. No context, no follow-up, just that. Stamped with a laughing emoji and sent to the whole group. I stared at it, waiting for someone, anyone, to chime in. Maybe a wrong chat or a backpedal. Even silence with a delete would have been better. But the message sat there, like an oil stain. They weren't laughing behind my back. They were laughing around me, confident I wouldn't respond. Confident I wouldn't matter enough to push back. I didn't type anything. I just closed the app and set my phone face down on the break room table. The rest of my lunch tasted like paper. That night, I couldn't sleep. I laid there, the ceiling fan humming above me, my thoughts tangled like a drawer of old wires. At midnight, I did the one thing I told myself I wouldn't do. I opened Instagram. I scrolled until I found her, Tessa, always posting stories with soft filters and too many hashtags. There it was, a photo from that morning, her and Grant, coffee cups in hand, laughter frozen mid-frame like a movie still. Around her neck was a red scarf, hand-knit, my pattern, my yarn, a gift I'd made during that one hopeful winter when I still thought kindness could soften people like Dolores. The caption read, "Safe spaces matter, grateful for people who see you." I read it 3 times, not because I didn't understand, but because I needed to be sure I wasn't misreading the cruelty. They didn't crop me out of their photos anymore. They replaced me altogether with someone who smiled sweeter, took up less space, didn't bake muffins that went uneaten or asked to be included in family portraits. I stood, walked to the hallway, stared at the wedding photo on the wall, me and Grant in matching flannel pajamas, arms around each other in front of the fireplace. His smile had been real that day, or maybe just recent. I took it down, carried it into the bedroom, pulled open the bottom drawer of my nightstand, and slid the frame inside. Face down, no glass shattering, no dramatic tears, just quiet. And in that quiet, there was a kind of certainty. I opened the group chat, scrolled to the message, tapped leave conversation. Then I went to bed, with silence wrapped around me like armor. The pouch was velvet, deep red, and small enough to be overlooked, unless you knew exactly where to look. I found it tucked between the mattress and the wall while changing the sheets, buried like a secret too lazy to be hidden well. I didn't open it right away. My fingers hovered. My pulse, steady at first, began to spike. When I finally unzipped it, there was a lipstick, used, a tiny vial of perfume, and the initials stitched inside, T.B. Tessa Bloom. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the soft creak of the springs loud in the quiet room. The air smelled faintly like lavender and citrus, her scent, not mine. He'd brought her here, not emotionally, not in whispers or glances or texts I wasn't meant to see. Physically, she had been in our bedroom, on my side. When Grant got home, I was still sitting in the same spot. I held the pouch up. "You forgot something." He blinked, his jacket barely off. "What's that?" "Tessa's," I said. Calm, too calm. He walked over, peered in, and shrugged. "She must have dropped it. You're overthinking." "She must have dropped it," I repeated slowly, on my side of the bed. He didn't answer. I didn't scream. I didn't break things. I simply stood up, walked to the bathroom, and locked the door. That night, I slept with my keys in the pocket of my robe. Not because I was afraid, but because I no longer felt safe in a place that used to be mine. A few days later at the grocery store, my card declined, twice. I stepped aside, pretending I needed to check something, pulled up the bank app, password rejected. I tried again, and again, locked out. When I got home, I asked Grant. He was at his desk, scrolling something useless. "Oh yeah, I changed it. Security update, nothing personal." "Nothing personal?" I echoed. "Look, you said you didn't want to handle bills this month anyway." I said I needed a break. I didn't say erase me. He shrugged, still not looking at me. "It's not a big deal." My voice tightened. "Is there something I should know? Or am I just not part of this anymore?" He didn't flinch. "You're making this into drama." That word, drama, hit differently when spoken by a man who let his mistress leave lipstick under my pillow. I said nothing else. I walked away. That night, while he slept with his back to me, I opened my email. Searched. Prenup. There it was. A scanned PDF from my lawyer. 4 years old, barely remembered but never deleted. I printed it, slid it into a manila envelope, and labeled the drawer, contingency. The printer in Grant's office whirred just loud enough to draw my attention. I walked in expecting to find one of his real estate flyers or a new resume draft. What I picked up instead was a wire transfer confirmation, $3,000 sent to Dolores. The ink was still warm. I stood in the doorway, paper in hand. "You sent money to your mother?" Grant barely looked up from his screen. "She needed it." "With my money?" He sighed. "I mean, it's ours, right?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "It's not. I've paid the mortgage, the groceries, the utilities, your car insurance, for over a year." He leaned back. "You always make everything about what you've done." That sentence sat between us like a live wire. Not a defense, a dismissal. I didn't reply. I folded the paper neatly, placed it on the desk, and walked away. That night, I didn't cook. I didn't clean. I didn't remind him that rent was due next week, or that his uncle still hadn't paid him for the last listing. Instead, I laid in bed thinking about the version of myself that used to fight for fairness. The one that believed communication was the bridge to survival. That woman was tired. This one was calculating. 3 days later was Lunar New Year. Dolores made a production of it every year. 3 days of meals, outfits, and rituals she didn't fully understand but loved the attention for. I stayed up until 2 a.m. prepping dumplings, soaking rice, chopping ginger. The next morning, I woke with a jolt. It was 8:13. I'd overslept. I scrambled out of bed, threw on a jacket, and rushed across the yard with bags of groceries in hand. The front door didn't open. I twisted the knob harder. Locked. I knocked twice. No answer. On the third knock, Dolores opened the door a sliver. She looked me up and down like I'd shown up uninvited. "We don't need lazy girls around here," she said. The door clicked shut before I could answer. I stood there for a long time, still holding the ginger, the rice, the pork for dumplings. My fingers felt numb. From cold or rage, I couldn't tell. Back home, I placed the bags on the counter, unpacked the items one by one. I wrapped the meat and stuck it in the freezer, put the rice back in the jar. Then I walked to the back of my closet. The duffel bag was still there. Same one I used when I moved in. Same one I told myself I'd only pull out if things got bad. I unzipped it, began folding clothes. Neutrals, essentials. No noise, no mess. But I didn't leave. Not yet. Later that night, I wrote a note in the back of my journal. One more line crossed, and I go. The house buzzed with conversation, clinking glasses, greetings exchanged in that fake nice tone people use during holidays. I was in the kitchen, balancing a tray of dumplings I'd prepped at sunrise, when I heard it. "Who's that?" a voice asked from the living room. Dolores answered with a sweet little chuckle, like this was her cue on stage. "Oh, she's just staying with us for now." Not my daughter-in-law, not even Grant's wife, just a guest. Temporary, replaceable. I didn't freeze this time. I didn't cry. I stepped into the doorway and caught her eye. She saw me. Her smile didn't flicker. Neither did mine. I placed the tray down and returned to the kitchen. My pulse didn't spike. My hands didn't shake. But something inside me, something old and tired, peeled away like paint in the summer heat. The next morning, I stopped by Grant's co-working office to drop off documents he was too lazy to collect himself. The front desk buzzed me in. As I turned the corner, I nearly ran into her. Tessa, coffee in one hand, her phone in the other. "Oh," she said, surprised but not startled. "Hi, Marla." I gave her a curt nod. She tilted her head, smiled like a therapist or a reality show contestant. "I didn't mean to replace you. It just happened." The hallway echoed. I didn't speak. I didn't blink. My silence must have felt threatening because she looked down and brushed past. She walked away. I stood there for one more second, then turned and left without handing over the folder. Let him come get it himself. That night, as I poured myself a glass of wine, a letter slid through the mail slot. No return address. I opened it. "Congratulations, Grant and Tessa. So excited for your next chapter together." The envelope had our address, but not my name. My hand stayed steady as I folded the card. I walked to the shredder, pressed the button, watched it disappear, bit by bit, edge by edge. Not rage, not heartbreak, clarity. Later that night, I opened my laptop, logged into the checking account I'd opened in secret. And in the Notes app, I wrote just one line. Exit date, March 3rd, no more extensions. They sat around the living room like nothing had ever happened. Matching sweaters, paper crowns from Christmas crackers, those forced smiles that photograph better than they live. Each gift was wrapped with perfect corners. I'd made sure of it. I hadn't wrapped them in anger. I'd wrapped them with precision. The kind of calm you feel just before the storm rolls in. Dolores was the first to open hers. She peeled the tape back like she expected fine lotion or imported silk. Instead, she pulled out a bottle of shampoo, the kind sold in bulk for $1. Her nose wrinkled before the cap even twisted. "What is this?" she muttered. The room quieted. Hannah's turn. She unwrapped a bottle of cheap perfume that reeked of gasoline and fake vanilla. Her eyes watered. She didn't laugh. Grant's father held up a pair of novelty socks printed with cartoon money bags. "Well," he said, "this is different." And then came the dog bone, massive, rawhide, nearly the size of the dog himself, too large to bite, too absurd to ignore. The silence was a slow-building siren. Then Dolores snapped. "She did this on purpose," she hissed. "This was meant to humiliate us." She slammed her gift down on the coffee table. "She knew. She planned it." Grant, sitting motionless with his hands on his lap, finally said, "It's not a big deal. Maybe it's just—" "Don't defend her!" Dolores snapped. "You let her stay here. You let her embarrass this family." Hannah shifted uncomfortably. The cousins looked at their phones. Someone stood to leave. The Ellison house had weathered decades of forced civility. But that night, the paint cracked. It wasn't the gifts. It was the truth, wrapped in cheap ribbon, hand-delivered with silence. They didn't know how to handle a woman who had stopped asking for a seat at the table and started pulling the damn cloth out from under it. Across town, I sat in my apartment, watching the snow fall against the window pane. The wine in my glass was cheap, but the quiet was expensive. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need their attention. I needed this, not as revenge, not even as closure, as proof that I was no longer theirs. In my notebook, I opened to a clean page, wrote one word in capital letters, "Done." Grant was already seated at the long mahogany table in the lawyer's office when I walked in. His fingers tapped against a folder. Mine, the one with the prenup we hadn't looked at in years. He looked up, as if he'd been expecting someone else. "You're really doing this?" he asked, voice brittle like something already cracked. I sat across from him, laid the signed papers down gently. "You already did," I said. He leaned back, arms crossed. "Things got complicated. You know that. My mom, work, the pressure." I let him talk. Not to hear him, but to watch how far he'd go trying to rewrite the story. "You didn't protect me," I said when he paused. "You erased me." There was nothing left to argue. We both knew that. Later, when I walked into my new place for the first time, I didn't feel triumphant, just still. The apartment was smaller than what we'd shared. The walls were thin. The heat clicked when it turned on, but the silence was mine. I unpacked a single suitcase, a box of books. My old cookbook collection, untouched for years, went onto the shelf. That night I cooked just for myself. No dietary restrictions to tiptoe around. No questions about why the seasoning was off. Just a bowl of pasta, fresh garlic, and quiet. I opened a bottle of wine. Not to celebrate. There was nothing glamorous about starting over, but to mark the end of carrying everyone else's weight. 2 days later at work, one of my coworkers approached me by the vending machine. She hesitated, eyes darting around. "I just wanted to say," she started, then exhaled. "What you did? Leaving? That took guts." Another chimed in quietly. "My husband's family is the same, always pushing me out. Maybe it's time I start thinking for myself too." I nodded, unsure what to say. I hadn't done any of this to inspire anyone. But it made sense that the quietest acts could ripple wider than the loud ones. That evening, a Facebook notification popped up on my phone. Dolores had tagged Grant in a post. "Family is everything," it read. The picture was a cropped one, no surprise. Just her, Grant, and Tessa. The holy trinity of carefully curated dysfunction. I didn't click. I hit block. Not out of spite, out of necessity. As the wind howled outside, I made tea, sat by the window, watched snow gather in slow silence on the fire escape. Just like it had the night I was told not to come to Christmas. But this time, the snow didn't feel like exile. It felt like insulation. I pulled the curtain shut, not to keep them out, but to keep me in. I lit a candle, opened my laptop, created a new document, typed, Chapter 1, How I Learned to Leave Without Losing Myself. Sometimes, the hardest thing isn't leaving. It's realizing you've already been gone for a long time, silently erased step by step, until you no longer recognize the version of yourself standing in the mirror. I thought staying meant strength. But I've learned that boundaries, silence, and eventually walking away can be even stronger. If my story feels familiar, maybe it's because too many of us have been told to shrink ourselves just to fit inside someone else's definition of family. But healing starts when we stop asking for a seat at their table and build our own instead. What about you? Have you ever stayed too long somewhere you no longer felt seen? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a 1 in the comments if this story spoke to you, or tell me where you're watching from. And if this wasn't for you, I still want to know, what part didn't connect? If you believe in stories that reflect real lives and hard truths, hit that subscribe button and join me for the next one, because the next chapter always starts with choice.